YouTube, welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. Mr. Terry, as I continue my search for historical knowledge found here on YouTube. Alright, today's video comes from a story that I've heard before and heard some of this account, and it's from Extra History. And they did a little video on Ibn Fadlan's writings, his chronicles, of going into Kievan Rus territory and basically meeting with Vikings. And this specific excerpt is a really famous one about a Viking funeral. I've heard of this before. And it's interesting because this guy is a Muslim trader, okay, coming from somewhere in the Middle East. I forget exactly where. So it's a totally like meeting of different worlds here, and you get, and I think I want to say, I'm not for sure, correct me if I'm wrong, that it might be one of the first recorded details of a Viking funeral, which is a pretty neat part of Viking culture. And without going into it yet, if you don't know, we'll check out the video. But really just interesting story of seeing the meeting of different worlds and how that kind of interacts. And also it's in with the context of the Islamic world's extensive trade into different parts of the world and trying to find these markets to trade in, as Islamic civilizations were kind of the carriers of products and civilization and a lot of ideas through what would we call the kind of Middle Ages here today. So Extra History always does a great job. So I'm looking forward to checking out this video. So if you like the video, go down below. A link to the original will be down there. Make sure you go click that so you can give them a like, view, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. And if you haven't subbed to my channel, love to have you around to hit that subscribe button and hit those notifications so you come hang out with us. All right, let's go ahead and get started then. So a Viking funeral.
Near the banks of the Volga River, a funeral ship blazes brightly against the dusk. The body of a Viking chieftain and his most cherished possessions crumble to soot and ash. Looking on, fascinated, is a man who has traveled over 2,500 miles, far from his home of Baghdad. He has traveled here to serve as a religious advisor for the newly converted people of Volga, Bulgaria. But it's another people who've captivated his attention, his admiration, and even his disgust.
Okay, so you have... Let me go back. Got a religious conversion here. Hold on.
Traveled here to serve as a religious advisor for the newly converted people of Volga, Bulgaria. But it's another people who've captivated his attention, his admiration, and even his disgust. The Rus Vikings.
I mean, doesn't that kind of just summarize what people say about the Vikings? They're like, they're so cool, and they're also like terrible at a lot of things. People say that like about the Mongols too. It's like they have this perception of this barbarity, but then they have these other unique cultural traits that are neat. So it's like, yay? Question mark.
This episode is sponsored by Audible. Start your own audiobook adventures today by visiting the link in the description below. In the year 921, the Khan of Volga, Bulgaria sent ambassadors to Baghdad asking for military and financial aid in return for conversion to Islam. In response, the Abbasid Caliph sent a delegation that included a faqih, an expert in Islam.
Okay, so Abbasid is one of the Islamic civilizations that have existed in the Middle East, and one of the early ones. So you had the first caliphate, the Umayyads, and there's been a history of the rise and fall of these Islamic civilizations that controlled, you know, what used to be Persia and into the Middle East, and they're just one of them. So that's interesting. Yeah, if they hear about potential conversion efforts, because that was a big part of, especially early on here, because you're talking the 10th century. It was still being a little more interested in proselyting or spreading the religion that way. So it's like if they see an opportunity that might help with conversion of more people, then they're gonna, the Abbasid, the Islamic empire there is gonna jump all over that. That was very common.
Islamic law and religious practice named Ahmed ibn Fadlan. In the tradition of Islamic travel writing, Ibn Fadlan chronicled the year-long journey from Baghdad and described the cultures and people he encountered along the way. A bit like the much later, much more famous world traveler and side trip aficionado, Ibn Battuta.
Yeah,
but not long.
Ibn Battuta is for if you're like a Western European ancestry person, he is like the Islamic Marco Polo. Those two traveled probably as far as we've ever seen anybody, and then chronicled. Although Ibn Battuta, I believe he did it kind of all on his own. Marco Polo's writings came actually after. When he returned back from a couple decades of traveling throughout Asia, and actually had it put together when he was captured and put into jail actually here. So they kind of went to some similar areas, but yeah. Anyways, that's more of a different story, though.
Long after Ibn Fadlan began working in the Khan's court, imparting the religious and administrative knowledge of Baghdad, a group of Rus arrived and set up camp along the river to trade.
Now, one thing you're going to get, the Islamic empires had administration down. They had it down. When Islamic conquerors came in and conquered Persia, one of the things they just adopted was a lot of the Persian administration systems. So that goes back to even ancient Persia. We're just known for their incredibly efficient administrative system over a large empire. And so if you want to know, if you want government tips, these are the people you work with. So it makes sense for here in Bulgaria.
Part of the Viking expansion, the Rus were one offshoot of a group that left Scandinavia a century before, seeking trade routes and kingdoms to plunder, which, if you're so inclined, you can learn more about over in our Viking expansion series.
Yeah, people don't know the Vikings were extensive traders. They built their economy on it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that they can grow with, but yeah, they would trade extensively. They had a whole Hanseatic, I believe that's how you pronounce it, trade network of these different states around the Baltic. And people were very interested in their stuff. But then you also would see times where they'd be like, you know what, rather than trade, let's just go raid this other place. That's where you get a lot of the famous Viking things that you hear about.
Now settled in Eastern Europe, the Rus traded northern commodities like fur, wax, and slaves captured in war for silk, silver, and other luxuries from the east and south. Their presence was not unusual to the Volga Bulgars. Because the Volga River ran through the center of the state, the Bulgars had access to trade with all manner of places and cultures. Baghdad and Constantinople in the south, Europe to the west, China to the east, and to the north, of course, Rus Vikings.
That's, yeah, I mean, look how important that is. That's that's like the crossroads of so many different routes. You have like a northern Silk Road coming up from, you have from China, and you've always had the stuff coming out from Europe early on here. Although a lot of the foreign trade coming out of Europe, not a lot of products necessarily that people wanted from like Western Europe, but it's why Constantinople has historically been maybe the most important city ever, because it connected those roads too. It connected the northern Silk Road that goes north of the Black Sea and ends to the Black Sea over there, and then you get the southern one that comes from northern India in through Persia, through Baghdad, and then of course coming into Europe where all that converges. But there's kind of another one here, especially when the Vikings sort of entered this semi-global trade network on the Volga River, which goes now through kind of where Russia is. I could see why this is a very important area of why you want contact there. Because, I mean, it's like you can connect to any place that you need to.
But while the Bulgars were used to the Rus, they were like nothing that Ibn Fadlan had ever seen before. I have never seen more perfect physical specimens, he wrote. Tall as date palms, blonde and ruddy. Each man has an axe, a sword, and a knife, and keeps each by him at all times. They are tattooed from fingernail to neck with dark green symbols.
Nice. So they're jacked, they're swole, blonde, already, and tall, already totally different than what they would have experienced in a place like Baghdad. Light skin, tall. I don't know if people were super muscular down there in Baghdad, maybe, but it sounds like this guy was like blown away. And then fully tattooed. Tattoos have been around, forever, but probably never seen anybody. Would have been very uncommon to see somebody fully with like, sleeves like that.
Oh, that's right. Shirtless, blonde, tattooed, armed to the teeth, and physically perfect. Where was I? Oh, yeah, that's right. The Vikings were skilled jewelry makers as well. By Ibn Fadlan's account, for every 10,000 silver a man was worth, he would make a silver or gold necklace for his wife. And these women had many, many necklaces. But while he found the Rus beautiful, he also found them kind of disgusting. As a highly educated member of Islamic...
Let's go ahead and guess. What's disgusting about them? Do they, never bathe? Is that going to be one they talked about? Maybe don't. Yeah, it's got to just be with personal hygiene, right? Is that what he's going to say?
Society. Hygiene was both a religious and social requirement. Hand washing, teeth cleaning, and regular bathing were the norm in Ibn Fadlan's world. But not so for the Rus. He described their hygiene habits with revulsion, telling us that they lived in long houses, with 10 or 20 people to a house. Each household would wash their faces, spit, and blow their nose each morning in a communal wash bin.
Oh. Wait, with the same water, whatever? Wash your face, spit. Why are you spitting in there all the time? And then some snot rockets. I just wouldn't... It doesn't seem like something you'd have to know all that much about, like, cleanliness germs, anything like that, to know that's probably not a good idea.
without changing the water. They had no sense of privacy when it came to having sex or answering the call of nature. They didn't wash their hands
Oh, so
before
they
eating.
just okay. So yeah, no no. They probably just call that no shame, right? Privacy, not a thing, right? Got to defecate or something. All right, we'll just drop down here. So no sense of that kind of shame there. Huh?
Or ever really. And perhaps most humorously, Fadlan found their singing to be just awful. They are the filthiest of God's creatures, he wrote. Indeed, they are like
But what's the music like? Isn't it like Skyrim and stuff? It's beautiful. It's got to be, right?
wild asses. And the Rus weren't just gross in his eyes, they were polytheistic pagans as well, a particularly abhorrent and exotic group to medieval Muslims. But Ibn
So
Fadlan's
polytheistic pagan, what that would mean is they worship many gods. Norse mythology, Viking mythology is kind of famous. Look into that, pretty cool stuff. So, as Islam is a would consider itself the most monotheistic, believing in one god and completely outlawing anything that even resembles anything else of worship, another deity or image. Yeah, this would be polar opposites that way for religious beliefs.
mixed feelings of attraction and revulsion aren't just valuable to us as an amusing tale of culture clash between an Islamic scholar and some very sexy, very stinky Vikings. The Vikings themselves were a largely oral culture that left no written accounts of their own traditions. So Ibn Fadlan's travel writing is actually the only first-hand account we have of some Viking traditions. But
Okay,
it's also
so yeah, that's what I was thinking about. When you live in a smaller community like they do, Viking communities, complex writing systems they're not necessary. Now it's going to be far more necessary as they develop, because if you're going to be doing a lot of foreign trade, you will need a writing system. That's usually what spurs on languages and writing systems in general. Things like record keeping and receipts, transactions, bills of exchange, that kind of stuff. If you want to be able to have a more innovative trade system, you have to be able to have record keeping. And that's usually where writing originally comes from. When you look at like at Sumerian cuneiform, the oldest writing system, when we were finally able to translate it, I don't know if it was kind of disappointing, but when we first were able to translate cuneiform, the oldest writing system we've ever uncovered, most all of it was about business transactions. So if they were looking for ancient knowledge or something like that, they went and found and looked up, like, all right, what's this going to say? We can finally translate it. Oh, it's like this many bushels of grain for this many goats. It's like, oh, darn.
so important to acknowledge that his account of the Rus might not be representative of all Vikings. The Rus had lived in Eastern Europe for about a century at that point, and undoubtedly absorbed many local practices. In fact, he may not have understood what he was seeing, and we aren't even sure who served as his translator and whether or not they knew what they were talking about.
True.
But thanks to
It's so important to know sourcing and point of view and all the historical thinking skills that come with something like that. I mean, it's so important to have outside sources for history, but they can also be prone to, just like with local sources, bias and stuff like that. We gotta be able to look deeper into things. Just the way it says something, you have to say, why does it say it? What is the perspective here? What is going on? What's the purpose of this? What is the audience? All those sorts of things.
Ibn
Hopefully you're learning that in school.
Fadlan's obsession with recording in detail everything from daily habits to religious practices, we at least have a window into how one group of Vikings conducted themselves. And the most famous example of this is the Viking funeral. Ibn Fadlan was horrified to discover that the Rus cremated their dead, a concept which, you guessed it, also fascinated him. It so happened that a Viking chief recently died, and the Rus allowed this strange foreigner to witness the funeral. And this is the summary of what he saw. First, they buried the corpse in a shallow grave, with offerings of bread, beer, and a lute, allowing them 10 days to sew the funeral clothing. They also gathered the family's enslaved people together and asked for a volunteer who was willing to die for their master.
Okay. Yep, I've heard this story. You get some kind of servant or somebody as a sacrifice of devotion to this person. So it's like, yeah, you wonder if people really sign up for this. Is this like an honor? Or is it one of these like semi-forced kind of things? Because doesn't it usually come from a slave?
After a pause, a young woman spoke up and said that she would do it. Once she volunteered to be the human sacrifice, Fadlan tells us, there was no going back. 2 people were assigned to stay with the volunteer night and day to make sure she didn't have any second thoughts.
Okay, so you can't change your mind. you're under constant watch. This already for Ibn Fadlan has got to be like weird. Like, I wonder if he understood right away with this volunteer that she was going to be dying. You wonder that.
After the funerary clothing was complete, they dragged the chieftain's boat up onto dry land, and an old woman who was to perform the ritual sacrifice, referred to as the Angel of Death, arranged a lavish bed of
What a
Byzantine
great
brocade
name. She's the one that's going to oversee the funerary service. She's the Angel of Death. Wow.
and cushions upon the deck. Then they exhumed the chieftain's body, dressed him in his funerary clothes, and propped him up on the bed.
Now he's been decomposing for at least 10 days, right? And they put him in a shallow grave so they could build him up. So he's really gross right now. But they're dressing him up, putting him on his awesome ship.
Also filling the ship with all manner of things: herbs, spices, beer, bread, and fruit.
It sounds like what the Egyptians did with pharaohs, right? You got buried or, sent to the afterlife or whatever with stuff, right? Maybe if they think that you could take it with you, like the Egyptians, maybe something like that. Maybe it's just an offering, giving some of their famous stuff or their stuff that their community was known for. I don't know if they believe that. Do they believe you can? Did Vikings believe you could take worldly possessions to Valhalla, the sort of Viking heaven, if you will?
Then the animal sacrifices began. They ritually slaughtered chickens, horses, cows, and even a dog, and arranged the bodies on the boat. And finally, when the time came, the human sacrifice. The woman who volunteered, in kind of an ecstatic trance after days of drinking and singing, enters each hut in the village. Now, what happened there is difficult to understand, given that it comes to us filtered through Ibn Fadlan and an unknown translator, neither of which may have understood what they were witnessing. But it does seem like there was some sexual component to the ritual, likely one that was violent and non-consensual. She was then brought out and lifted up.
So this is a rough 10 days for her, too. She's volunteered, right, and can't apparently back out, and is getting herself right, but that includes, intoxication, and it looks like abuse and stuff like that. What a traumatic experience for this woman.
3 times. Once in honor of her father and mother, once in honor of her ancestors, and a final time in honor of the man she was about to die for. Then they took her to the ship, where she met the Angel of Death for the final time. She gave her bracelets to the old woman, and in return, she received a bowl of beer to drink. The volunteer then sang a song to bid farewell to her loved ones. Men with wooden staffs and shields gathered, and began to beat them percussively. It covered the noise as the young woman was simultaneously stabbed and strangled.
Ooh.
And with the
so this isn't a she's not being put to sleep there. She's being killed. I mean, she's being killed, but not in a peaceful way. They're stabbing her and beating her. Do they need to do that? Make it so probably very painful? Does that make the experience, enhance the experience for the voyage? I don't know.
Sacrifice done, they set the boat alight. As Ibn Fadlan watched the flames of the funeral boat blaze, thinking on all of the ritual brutality he'd just witnessed, a Rus nearby turned and spoke to him. His interpreter translated.
Yeah.
"You Arabs are foolish," the Rus said. "Why's that?" Ibn Fadlan answered. "You take the person who is the most beloved to you and the most respected among you, and you leave them in the ground, so that the earth, the insects, and the worms consume them. We burn them with fire in an instant, and they enter paradise forthwith from that very moment. Because of the great love that their God has for them, he sent the wind to carry them off to the afterlife within the space of an hour." The Rus laughed. Ibn Fadlan considered this. By no means did the spectacle of the funeral make him question his own religious practices, but the Viking was right. An hour did not pass before the boat, the girl, and the Viking chief had all become dust blown on the wind.
Wow. Okay. So this is where it's interesting when you have different groups of people that don't interact, haven't interacted or had much knowledge of each other. Everything about your culture can seem not only just different, but wrong, right? To another way. Like this Viking is, he apparently had heard, that Muslims do a simple burial and stuff like that, and see it as disrespectful in that way, where somebody might be like, no, and we're returning, and even Allah's defense, someone might say, no, we put them back in the earth so they can return to from whence they came, and they can be sort of reborn, in some way, and become the earth and become part of the living, whatever process of the planet. You know what I mean? Like kind of that way. And then, but it's almost like the same thing that the Vikings would be saying is this, hey, this is how you make that transition, and this is the respectful thing to do. So I mean, it's all just perspective, right? Because none of them would view what they do with their dead as disrespectful. It's just looking at it differently, right? And you see that when you get these clashing of worlds.
Ibn Fadlan's account is not only useful in what it describes, but how it also forces us to think about the overlapping biases and filters contained even in a first-hand account. Is he an unimpeachable witness or misunderstanding events? Was this ritual a standard practice among Vikings, or a blend unique to these Rus? But perhaps what Ibn Fadlan's account does, more than anything, is tell us about his own culture. How he could be both attracted and repelled by strange customs, how he reacted to religious violence, and how a cultured, curious Islamic scholar perceived the world when he was very far from home. Once again, thanks so much to Audible for sponsoring this episode. Now, I know I've mentioned this before, but I really do have trouble just finding time to read. Who knew show running a YouTube channel would be so much work? Oh, everyone did. All right, fair enough. But that's why I love Audible and their countless audiobooks, podcasts, and Audible originals that I can listen to while cooking, working out, or even playing a game. And actually, Rob just recommended an audiobook to me that I think is super thematically appropriate. Michael Crichton's novel, Eaters of the Dead, a fictional tale told from the perspective of Ibn Fadlan, who instead of going home to Baghdad, joins up with the Vikings and finds himself witnessing the events of Beowulf. Yeah, because, Grendel, finds a way. And because Audible offers free and easy audiobook exchanges, and member credits can roll over for a year, I can engage with all their cool stuff at my own pace. So, for a 30-day free trial, plus your first audiobook and 2 Audible originals for free, visit audible.com/extra credits. Legendary thanks to Ahmed Ziad Turk, Casey Muscha, Dominic Valenciana, Gunnar Clovis, Kyle Murgatroyd, and Oriels1.
The real MVPs, right? Let's just go and end back to all right. Well, I do like kind of how they end with sort of a lesson about studying history, which is, I think it's easy to understand that we tend to find things more historically accurate depending on the more sources you have on it, and especially corroborating sources, internally, externally, having an outside person like even Fadlan. Now, of course, it would also be helpful if you had some from the Viking perspective as well, so you could see those, and the more of those you want to be able to do. But when we put so much knowledge into one source, we have to be very, very critical of that source and look at all the things that are important in looking at a source. Again, you got to look at context, what's going on in the world around him at that time, the point of view of the person recording history. So who is this person? What is their background, right? When you record things in history, you're often looking through, think of as eyeglasses of what you know, right? You're looking at the world through your experiences. Then you need to look at the purpose of a document. Why is this document being created? So for this guy, why, Ibn Fadlan, why is he making this? Why is he going to the effort of chronicling it? Right? Has he been paid to do it? Is he doing it just because it's a hobby of his? Whatever. And then, so the purpose of it. Why does this exist? Right? And then intended audience. Right? When it comes to recording history, is this document or whatever? Is it intended for somebody? Right? Is it meant to be seen by other people? Because how you may record something may depend on who is meant to look at it, right? What is the, and that kind of ties in with purpose a little bit too, but you'll see that. Hopefully you guys learn these type of skills and have learned these type of skills in your history classes. If you hadn't, and you're already out of school, go learn it. It's a very simple process. Those 4 steps I just told you are things we talk about and should be talking about in education, and not just with recording history, but really with anything. Record any kind of information, the news, all that stuff. We got to use those skills, and we'll find, I think, things to be more accurate and unbiased. So that's great. Little side note there. But that was great to see a Viking funeral. Would you want a Viking funeral? Maybe you don't want to be the woman who gets sacrificed, but what do you think of that cultural thing? You may think that's the barbarity of specifically with the woman, but besides that, even what do you think of that custom of you are on a you put on a ship? One of your things that helps define you is something like a Viking and their ship, their longboat, being there, cremating the body, being having stuff sent with you, and the idea of your ashes sort of being carried away into the afterlife, that kind of thing. What do you think? Do you think it's like a charming thing? Does it sound just very odd and barbaric? Would you want one? I don't know. Anyway, great little video. I hope they do more of these too, or it's like kind of one video. The Extra History is known for doing a lot of those series. I like the mix, and maybe they're doing that a little bit more, where you can just hit one of them there and kind of condense it that way. I like both formats, the kind of miniseries approach and then kind of the one-off approach. So, anyway, this is awesome. Great. Now, before you leave, okay, make sure you go down to in the description thing down there, my description, and go click on the link so you can give them the like, view, subscription, all that stuff there. Give them some love and support their channel that way. And then if you haven't again subbed to me, love to have you around, be a part of our community there. Hit those notifications so you come hang out with us in our live stuff. Join our Discord server. You can come talk about Vikings. People talk about Vikings in the server. There's a channel for that if you want to get into that, or it's any historical subject. Link down below to go ahead and get that description. Thank you to everyone that's been supporting through channel memberships, Patreon, that kind of stuff. I appreciate those donations that you guys have been given. I really, really do. But thanks for just being here, being part of the historical community, and taking an interest in this stuff. It really is important. So with that being said, we'll see you guys later. Bye.